It is the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George, and it's still the off season, but we have lots of things to talk about and get into. It's still, yeah. Well, it's June, so I guess we still have quite a bit of off season
we have
left.
3 more months of this to look forward to.
Yeah, that's true. But once we hit August, I think that the football content will roll in. It'll be smooth sailing after that. We just have to get through the next 2 months, and then I think we're okay. Now, luckily, the college football gods blessed us with an SEC media days this past week, prior to this recording, and lots of complaining and whining, which is very fun to talk about. So we'll get into that.
People are going to complain about that being the lead topic for this show. There were people.
No, it's funny.
Oh, is this a Texas podcast? I saw somebody
for a little
say last
bit.
week, even though we literally talked about Texas for like 3 minutes and then pivoted back into an Ohio State topic the rest of the show.
Hey, it's fun, and if it's fun, then it's for me, and I like dunking on the SEC wherever possible.
We're obsessed. We're so obsessed with all the teams other than Ohio State.
I actually, you know what? I was thinking about this before we recorded. I do have an Ohio State connection with all of this, so I'll get into that, I guess, as means of an intro, and then we can talk about the other stuff. So we'll talk about the SEC media days for a little bit. EA Sports unleashed their new trailer for College Football 26, with the just photorealistic, really, depictions of college football head coaches. We can describe those for you if you haven't
Bryce
seen them.
Underwood propaganda.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to talk a little bit about the end of an era, another television era, one that I actually care about this time, and then.
I didn't have to strong arm Johnny into that topic.
That's right. And then maybe a shout out to a fellow Middletonian. So, look forward to all that. But let's talk about SEC Media Days. And I introduce all of this with an Ohio State tidbit. And, one of the key, I guess, things that you could really take away from SEC Media Days last week was kind of the rank desperation emanating from every team. Just basically the idea that they are super concerned about their kind of superpower status within college football, and how they were going to preserve that.
Had anointed the Big Ten ahead of the SEC last week, and now they're very, very nervous and shook about their status.
Well, okay, so that's what's crazy about it, because first of all, it shouldn't carry any weight, but I think it does. I, honest to God, think there are a lot of people in the South who heard that and went, "Oh my God, well, she's right." And they seriously, like,
God, I can't believe this Fox media member is pushing the Big Ten ahead of the SEC.
No, but they genuinely, this is how it works.
Feinbaum to clap back.
Yeah, but no, for real though, this is how it works. They're like, "Well, that Urban Meyer, he could win some championships," and then he says something like that. I genuinely think there are people who hear that and think it holds weight. It doesn't. I want to emphasize that. I don't care what Urban Meyer has to say at this point in his career, but I do think they are somewhat defensive about it, and that's compounded. And this is where I bring in Ohio State. This is compounded by the fact that Ohio State beat 2 SEC teams en route to winning a national championship. And I think that also matters. I think that is a significant item of pain for people in the South, for people who are SEC fans, because, again, their assumption was like, "Well, our boys, they get a chance to go ahead and, take some of these Northern boys out, these Yankee boys out. They'll do it." And then Tennessee rolled up to Ohio Stadium thinking they were going to toss the field goal posts into the old Tangy, and they got their asses kicked. And then you saw Ohio State go toe-to-toe with Texas and beat them essentially in what was a home game for them. I think that does a lot to their pride, and I think it does a lot to their pride, considering that they didn't have Bama in the whole thing, that Georgia got skunked by Notre Dame. Like, all of that combined, I think, creates a very defensive SEC. And you kind of saw the result of that in SEC Media Days. I'm going to explain exactly what they were complaining about in a second. But, George, what did you want to say?
I don't know if I agree with your stance on that.
Well, you're wrong, but go ahead anyway. It's fine.
Well, a couple things. Number one,
go ahead.
One of us is actually operating out of the South at the moment.
Fair enough.
So I've got firsthand experience with having, a finger on the pulse, or taking the temperature, so to speak, of the climate in terms of the SEC versus the Big Ten. My boss currently beyond 11 Warriors and my full-time gig is a Tennessee fan married to an Ohio State fan.
That's
And so
rough for him.
interest well, she's a woman is the Tennessee fan. And
Oh, I see. Okay, I got you. Okay.
yeah,
Rough
and
for
it
her then.
was I have to tell you that it like Tennessee is kind of the redheaded stepchild of the incestuous SEC family. Like
I can see that. I can see that
they
a little
like
bit.
they start feeling themselves a little bit too much, and then the Georgias and the Alabamas and the LSUs and the traditional powers in the conference are all looking at it as, all right, let's do something of actual consequence, and then maybe we'll
Right.
start
So
taking
this
you
is they're the
seriously.
Michigan states, let's say, of
Right.
the
So
SEC.
Ohio State I think they're actually more thrilled to see Tennessee humiliated by losing to a team like Ohio State
Mm.
than they are upset that the brand of the SEC would be tarnished by Tennessee having a disappointing performance against a team like Ohio State or a representative of the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of this was Texas's first or second year. I mean,
I think it was
they
their first
haven't
year in
been
the SEC.
they haven't been in the SEC very long. So, and they weren't SEC champions. Georgia was. They like Texas, I don't think has like the long-term staying power yet where even though they are technically part of the SEC, they're part of the SEC in the same way that we consider USC to be part of the Big Ten, right?
Mm-hmm.
They just got here. They've been here for 5 minutes. It's like, yeah, you're part of the family, but you're not part of the old guard. Whatever you do at this point is more of a reflection of, you being part of like the new chapter than it is like any of the I mean, we'll if they have any success against an SEC team, I'm sure as Big Ten supporters will, gladly welcome it. But in terms of them tarnishing the image of the conference, it's very easy to dissociate from that at this stage when they really haven't been involved in the grand scheme of the conference for very long. So I
So
think it's
okay,
easy
so
to apply that level of dissonance to Texas having a letdown against Ohio
right.
State in the semifinal than it is to be like, oh, this represents a changing of the guard. I would argue Alabama losing to Michigan, despite it
Well,
not being in a relevant bowl game, is more
yeah.
humiliating than anything Texas or Tennessee had happen against Ohio State.
Well, and that's actually kind of what else I was going to bring up. So yes, that I think is a big deal. I also think Illinois beating South Carolina is part of that too. So you've
Oh,
got
that was hilarious.
yeah, no, it was objectively incredibly funny. Like
Especially with the whole feud between
yeah,
Bielma and Beamer that unraveled during the game,
100%.
and Beamer getting genuinely hot and bothered
Yeah.
about how Bielma was kind of dogging them a little bit.
Yeah, and not understanding
That
how Brett
that was great.
that was great, and it's funny because, like, everybody in the Big Ten is familiar with Brett Bielema and their, just his propensity for trolling and being just a gigantic turd. But I don't think South Carolina was familiar with his game, I guess is what I would say. And so that outcome was incredibly funny. And when you add it up, you've got 4 times that the SEC took it to the chin against the Big Ten. Now, I think Missouri won a game over a Big Ten opponent. I can't remember, but it was a relatively close game. Um, my point with all of this is that the
One other
SEC.
thing, I also think it's
Yeah, go ahead.
easy for the people supporting the conference to forgive Georgia for having a letdown, even though it wasn't against a Big Ten team. I think given the injury that happened to Carson Beck, on top of the
Sure.
fact that I believe it was the week before the game that Kirby Smart's father passed away. So he was,
Hmm.
and I don't know if that came out until after the game that he was dealing with that loss. But I think once that came out after the fact, it was kind of easier for people that were like, oh, Georgia
Right.
just had this letdown postseason effort. It was easier for them to forgive that. So they're
Well,
now
and
expecting more of a bounce back.
and I think for individual teams that's true. I think the crux of what we're talking about with this though is the fact that some teams were left out of the playoff versus, like when they talk about Alabama not being in the playoff or Ole Miss not being in the playoff or something like that. And you would think uh, that the results of the bowl games would kind of temper that a little bit, but apparently not, because at SEC Media Days, there were a number of reports. There was a like a document that the SEC was circulating around the media, talking about how tough the SEC schedule was, their strength of schedule, and all that kind of stuff. It's like, well, you're playing other SEC teams, and they're always considered to be strong, and so it's this recursive loop where it's like, well, our strength of schedule is good because we play good teams, and all the good teams are in our conference, so we play all our conference teams are struggling, and it's this kind of like snake eating its own tail, where as long as you assume that the conference is good, then your strength of schedule is always going to be good because people believe that to be the case. And I would argue, and I think people have been arguing for a long time, is that maybe it's not quite the case anymore. Like it used to be. I think at one point the SEC could absolutely claim dominance over college football from even top to bottom, but now it's a obviously very top heavy conference. There's a big it's really it's what the Big Ten looks like in a lot of years. There's a big mushy middle where you've got a lot of mediocre teams, and then you've got some just absolute crap teams at the bottom. So the SEC losing that, I think, that aura of uniqueness that they've really wanted to have, that exceptionality. I think that bothers them, and they understand that right now they're essentially in a competition with the Big Ten, right? Like there are two superpowers in college football in terms of conferences. There's the SEC and the Big Ten. The Big Ten has won the last two national championships. I do think that makes a guy like Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, I think that makes them sweat a little bit, honestly. And you kind of saw that at SEC Media Days, where they had this coordinated push to talk about how strong their schedule was and why it's so important and why they should get all these benefits. And I think it's silly. I think it's dumb, especially given how they performed in bowl season.
And at the risk of sounding redundant, I mean, that just really speaks to the incestuous nature of the conference that I was talking about earlier, and that I've talked about several countless times over on this show across the last 2 years. Like, fact that they have to prop themselves up by not pointing to their out of conference results, but their results against each other.
That's the other thing that drives me crazy, is that, okay, so Sankey also said, well, I guess not losing is better than playing quality opponents. And I'm like, then go outside your conference. Schedule. Like, I understand some of the marquee teams do this. Georgia has done it. Alabama has done it. Texas has done it. That's awesome. You need to have other teams who are willing to travel more than 100 miles away from their campus to play an opponent to actually make that claim.
One of the most baffling stats that I've heard about any program in the last couple of years was when Florida was about to play Utah in the opener before I think it was the opener for not this past season, but the one prior to it in 2023. And I believe the stat was something to the effect of Florida had not played an out-of-conference road game outside of the state of Florida since like 1995. And at that moment, I said, "Okay, I'm betting the house on Utah." And Utah had to cover the spread. They were favored. And Utah did that. I mean, it was crazy to me to hear that, and that speaks to your point that it's like, yeah, it's like, oh, they don't, not leaving your state to play out of conference for
decades,
almost 3 decades, is absurd.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. And again, they will have these token games sometimes that they'll do. Like LSU went to Wisconsin. I think they lost that game, actually. But like, the point is that that's so rare in the SEC. And part of the reason why conference expansion, I think, in the Big Ten has felt slightly more natural is because Ohio State and other marquee teams, and frankly, top to bottom, the conference has been scheduling people all over the place for so long. And that was part of Ohio State's strategy, is like every year there's going to be a marquee team that they play, right? They're going to play some other blue blood every single year. And that was a concerted effort on the part of Gene Smith and the coaches and whatnot to make sure that happened, because they knew it was positive for the program. And so the SEC complaining about that is hilarious to me. They will still not will they willingly go to Ohio Stadium like that? Things that they haven't had pre-existing. Yeah, they will. They'll go to Ohio Stadium. But will a medium tier team, right? Will the South Carolinas of the world, are they going to be rolling up to Minnesota? I don't see that happening very often. So I think that's something that they need to.
It was very funny to see people chiding the schedule graphic that Ohio State put out this past week, because, they did kind of transparent representations, colorless representations of all the opponent logos. And so it looks like they're playing Texas and then Grambling State and then Georgia right afterwards, because they have the same logos, Grambling State.
Yeah,
all the SEC people were like, we know what that really means.
Dang, Ohio State doesn't play. Yeah, that's true. So it's just interesting, and I do think in general it doesn't really make a ton of difference, but the whining from the SEC cracks me up. The other thing that I thought was kind of funny out of SEC media days is that they're going to fine the home team $500,000 if their fans storm the field after a win, which, like, this to me seems like just something that Greg Sankey really, really, really cares about, and he's the only person who does. But because he has the authority, he's going to enforce it as much as he possibly humanly can. I understand
they
that
can't have another embarrassing situation like what happened with Alabama against Vanderbilt last year.
Oh, sure.
Every team now, when they get their first win over the post-Saban empire, is going to be flaunting their victory in the face of the college football royalty. We can't possibly have that.
And I kind of wonder, I mean, that's a good point, because part of me is like, well, I mean, you can make an argument for safety, right? Like, it's clearly, it can, I've been in field rushings before. It's a scary thing when people are really, really after it.
I think but I don't know that that's happen anyway, and schools are just going to have to pay the fine. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like, you're going to tell, I mean, that's the thing about it. Okay, so it's Ohio Stadium. Let's say Ohio Stadium, they beat Michigan, right, at home or something, and it's a 1v2 situation, or Ohio State hasn't won in a long time. You're going to tell those fans to, like, stay in their stands. Like, you're really going to be able to convince hundreds of 100,000, tens of thousands of people to just chill and be cool. Like, that's not going to happen.
No,
like, you can't do that.
Maybe in a basketball arena, but in a football stadium,
forget it. There's too many people. There's way too many people.
Too much ground to cover too.
Exactly.
The amount of security that would actually be required.
You would have to have cops shoulder to shoulder, like, around the entire perimeter of the field. Like, there's no way you could do
several platoons of Schlegels.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Captain Anthony Schlegel. This is how we do it, folks.
I mean, not just people, not just like security staff willing to stop, but literally like ones that will punish.
ROTC would have to, like,
coming on the field.
Exactly.
And that's not they're not going to be willing to do that.
No, I don't think so either. And I just think it's another example of them trying to exert control over something that can't be controlled necessarily. And you see that a lot sometimes in these sports where, like, the person who's the AD or the conference director, whatever, they're like, okay, we're going to set up this situation perfectly so our desired outcome will happen. And then when it doesn't happen, they get really, really, really upset.
It's a reflection of the theme of them losing their grip on the sport and their power.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. They're like, no, we want to keep it exactly the way we want it. We want to be able to have, whatever, the venture capitalists buy the naming rights to the conference, but we don't want to change it too much. And I'm like, they just don't do it, because you're not going to be able to control it after that. You're not going to be able to say, like, oh, well, then, if you're going to, like, put in these rules.
Well, the American South has always been very welcoming of change, has it not?
Yeah, of course, right. Yeah, that's right. Clearly the spot in the country that you want to go to if you want to try something radical and new. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting, and we'll see how Big Ten Media Days goes. Again, these are the Big Ten and the SEC right now are the same. They're in the same pot, and so they've got to kind of. coordinate in some ways, even though they're directly competing. And so I am really interested to see what happens with the messaging that Tony Petitti kind of gives out to the coaches and how they interact with the media, especially with regards to this, the playoff format that's currently being discussed, what that's going to look like. I mean, is it the 5+11 thing or the 4-4-2-1 or whatever the hell? I don't even remember what was being discussed. 2-2-1, something like that. I don't know. I'm curious to see how the Big Ten decides to come out later on this summer and kind of advocate for themselves a little bit. So that should be interesting to
I
say.
will say, relative to something a point I made last week, it's interesting that there's this kind of insecurity emerging from the SEC, given what I'd said previously about ESPN and AB and Disney are not like that relationship is set in stone at this point.
Yeah,
Like
of
the
course.
biggest media arm in the sport is regardless of how whether the SEC continues to fall from grace or whether the South rises again, so to speak, the ESPN is not going to stop selling the national audience on SEC supremacy.
Right.
So you would think that with that kind of backing, that there wouldn't be this kind of push to try to reinforce what has been just kind of the predominant thought among the common college football fan over the last 2 decades.
Mm-hmm.
You would think that there would be a more relaxed
Like a measured
attitude
kind of,
about it, relative to like, yeah, okay, the Big Ten have, they've gotten a couple,
right.
but we're still top dogs. We're still the breadwinners, the main
it still
ones
means
of the
more.
sport.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, so it's the fact that there is this kind of attempt speaks from the powers that be in the SEC, makes you wonder, has the opinion of the common college football fan, has the attitude shifted enough to where they're feeling it to where they have to do this?
I mean,
And
what if
is
like
the
Penn State
skepticism
wins the
of ESPN
championship
in
this
place?
year? I mean, that, what if
Let's
all
not entertain that thought.
James Franklin, exactly as successful as Ryan Day.
I
How about
think
that?
I would actually rather see an SEC team win than another team from the Big Ten. I'm not even kidding. I'm really not.
I don't know. I think it depends on the SEC team. Like if it was a funny SEC team, then yes. But if it were like Georgia or Alabama, I would say no.
Even mind Alabama is obnoxious. They don't need any more. But
I agree.
honestly, I don't mind Georgia. I mean, I'm biased. I was born in that state, so I've always kind of had a soft spot for them. But yeah, I mean, would it be good for, I guess, the sport generally if Georgia gets a third one within the last like 6 years? Probably not. I don't think a ton of people would be totally stoked on seeing that. At the same time, I would rather see them win than an Alabama.
Yeah, agreed.
So,
well, we'll see how it goes.
Honestly.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm real. Obviously, you want Ohio State to win another national championship. You want them to win all the national championships. But if there's going to be a team coming out of the Big Ten, if it's not Ohio State, I mean, my personal preference would be like Illinois, right? Like, who is going to be like sneaky good this year and might get into the playoff. Honestly, like I think they have a good shot at it this season.
It's cool when meme teams do it, but at the same time, I don't want, like, given the position Ohio State occupies, I'm good with other teams that are at the status that Ohio State is, like Georgia winning them. I don't want other.
Yeah, you don't want somebody challenging Ohio State supremacy in the Big Ten. That makes sense.
I don't want another program to have their profile raised to the same level where it could start potentially detracting from Ohio State's ability to attract talent in the future. So Oregon, absolutely not.
No, hell
Penn
no,
State,
I don't want that.
Absolutely not. Yeah. Michigan, you probably guess how I feel about that. I'm fine with Georgia winning. I don't want to. You could make an argument that Clemson is still in that conversation. I personally don't think that they are, just because I think a lot of the success Dabo had was just leaning on two historically great quarterbacks for college football and Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like if they were really still in that Ohio State, Georgia tier, that they would have done something relevant within the
Oh no, I
last like
agree.
5 or so years.
Yeah, no, he lucked out with two of the best, college football quarterbacks in the past 25 years, and rode that to some
And
success.
I want the Alabama descent to continue.
Oh yeah, of
You
course.
know,
No, I mean that
so
would be
we'll.
great.
It's kind of would you like that makes me wonder like other like in terms of that Ohio State Georgia tier right now, do you really think there are any other teams that are kind of in that? I think the
Um,
closest might be Oregon, and they
yeah,
haven't
that was
even
what I
come
was gonna say.
close to.
I was gonna say Oregon, but the problem with Oregon is that they have to win something. I mean, and the issue is with Oregon is like, yes, they have to win something, but now it's got to be almost like, I mean, you have a Big Ten championship, and that's great, but it was instantly devalued because then you got beaten by the team that went on the national championship from your own conference, and so
Yeah.
as a result, it's like, yeah, we got the conference championship, but like nobody cares. It's like winning the conference. It's like being the number one team in the country and winning your basketball conference, but then getting skunked in the second round of March Madness. Like nobody's going to be hanging that banner with a lot of pride. You know what I mean? So like,
Yeah.
I think that is part of it. If they get to the national champion, they have to win a national championship. That's the biggest problem.
And I
It
think you could
really,
say that about several programs right now.
yeah,
What Texas and Notre Dame. There's 1A and 1B with Georgia and Ohio State, and
yeah,
then there's a lot of fringe makes it sound like a bigger chasm than it is, but in
sure.
terms of them being on the cusp of jumping into that tier, they're not quite there, but they need that legitimacy in order to really say that they've
Which,
made that leap, which
but see,
Ohio
that's the
State
problem.
needed prior to last season too, but they got it.
Yeah, it's kind of the same way that I feel with Notre Dame, where it's like they can look as good as they want, and I thought they were great at the end of last season. I fully expected them to make the national championship game,
As
but
did I,
but
because Dubcast knows ball.
that's right. But the problem is they haven't won a national championship since what, like the early '90s, late '80s. I mean, you've got
Newt
to prove
Rockney
something.
era. I don't know.
And they've looked terrible in bowl games in general, and that's the thing, man. Like even Texas can at least lean on their national championship, with Vince Young and whatnot, and even that was like 20 years ago, and that shows you how long it's been for some of these, quote unquote blue blood programs. So no, I'm with you, man. I think it's basically Georgia and Ohio State, and that's it. And even Georgia, like there, I would say that most people would put them a little bit above Ohio State simply because Ohio State doesn't have the same kind of national
I
championship
would.
record recently.
The Ohio
So
State's got to win another one this
yeah,
decade before they're
right.
firmly like on the same level as Georgia. But at the same time, I still think it's a 1A, 1B
I agree.
situation.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
Ohio State is the Ronaldo to Georgia's Messi at
which
this
it makes
moment.
me sad because I genuinely like Messi is so like he's my favorite soccer player of all time. All right, so that's the first part of this. Let's do Ask Us Anything. But before we do that, we do want to remind you that the Dubcast is sponsored by the Dry Goods Store at 11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers, all kinds of great stuff. Check it out. Ask Us Anything, which you can do by sending us questions to dubcast at 11warriors.com. Has a few questions this week. This first one's from Joe. He actually wants to know, why does the SEC hate storming the field so much? And I think I like your explanation the most, George, which is it's an optics thing. They don't want to see their bad teams get beaten by good teams, and that's just like gonna etch it in people's brains that they're not as dominant as they thought they were. I think that's a fair, honestly, I think that's a fair analysis, a fair take from you. Because it is all, it's like we got to make sure, these boys still look good. We don't want to make them look bad.
Well, I mean, you think about the damage that did to Alabama's playoff bid last year. Not just the fact that they lost to Vanderbilt, but the optics of the loss. I mean,
right.
You remember they were playing like the Saban comments about Vanderbilt on the scoreboard after the game and stuff while all the students are on the field and yucking it up and everything.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, of course.
And
Yeah. And then they
ESPN
played.
is already going out of their way to
Yeah.
sandbag like how dire of a loss it was.
Of course, right. Yeah.
Like it cheapened their brand immediately, and it just did not look good. If you're able to keep them from storming the field and showing how much of a ruckus that a lower tier team knocking off one of the SEC royalty is, that inherently, like, it makes it easier to memory hole how much of an upset that is when it comes time to have these discussions about who gets into the playoff or not.
Right.
Now,
Right.
they still ended up losing to Oklahoma, and that ended up being the nail in the coffin for them, particularly because they didn't even get in the end zone in that game.
Mm-hmm.
But that the like once they lost to Vanderbilt, that was the moment at which most people started assuming that they weren't going to make the playoff. And it took a lot of speechcraft, if you will, from ESPN and a lot of the media to try to reintroduce the prospect of Alabama making the playoff as the season wore on before they ultimately blew it against Oklahoma. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is just part of an effort to try to, and again, the fact that they were talking up their schedule and it's so many of their teams playing each other, like it's not like they're worried about getting upset by an out of conference team
Yeah.
and
Right.
then having to deal with the optics of that. It's most of the time when they're playing out of conference games, they're paying, the Citadel to come to town so they can beat them 60-0
That's
and
right.
send them home with a bag of $1 million and say that
Mm-hmm.
they got a layup win, in the second week of November or whatever.
Right.
They're like, most of their games are going to be against each other. They're inevitably going to be playing the, less serious teams in the SEC. On the off chance that they end up blowing one of those games, they don't want to have their profile in terms of the CFP blown up by the optics of, I think Vandy's upset of Alabama was probably the most memorable upset of the last season. And a big
Well,
part of that was the outpouring
unfortunately,
of
I would say there's one that you might be forgetting, but
I probably am. What was
well,
that?
well, maybe you forcibly removed it from your brain. Maybe it's
No,
something.
I think that I think it was a big deal to Ohio State and Michigan
Mhm.
fans, but because it didn't ultimately, I think it. Now, if you asked me a week after the game, I would agree
Mhm.
with you. But given what happened afterwards and that Ohio State made
Yeah,
up for it, I
yeah, I
think
can
that
see
even
that.
though it means a lot to us, I
Right,
think in the
right.
grand scheme of the common college football fan, that loss to Vanderbilt had a much more detrimental effect on the rest of
Sure,
Alabama's
I can see
season
that. I can see that.
than Ohio State losing to Michigan did. Now, you can say that I'm coping or whatever, and there's an
I
argument
think a
for
little
that.
bit, but I
There's
do
an
think
argument for it.
but I would say that like at the end of the season, I think it's pretty clear that the loss. I mean, it's obvious that the loss to Vanderbilt was more detrimental to Alabama than it was for Ohio State to lose to Michigan,
Right.
right? Like clearly, because even though it was the last game of the regular season, Ohio State was still able to get the college football
But the
playoff.
other side of that argument, I think, is the fact that Ohio State got upset in its own stadium. And so the
Yes,
attitude after the game, I know there was a big, there's a big brawl and everything, which,
yeah, brouhaha.
certainly sensationalized it in a way that a storming of the field doesn't necessarily do it. But where everybody was kind of laughing at Ohio State as opposed to feeling good. Nobody was feeling good for Michigan for
No,
winning that game
no,
other
I
than
don't
their
think so.
fans, as opposed to celebrating Ohio State getting egg on its face.
Hmm.
With the Alabama Vanderbilt game, there was laughing at the fall from grace of Alabama in the post Saban era, on top of the fact that Vanderbilt hadn't beaten this team for like what, 40 years or
Yeah,
something.
people were
And there
genuinely
was,
stoked for Vanderbilt.
right, it was the best moment that program has had in several decades.
Yep.
And so there was the feeling good for Vanderbilt on top of the laughing at Alabama that I think makes it a more monumental upset in last season than Ohio State and Michigan proved.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
So the SEC
right.
wants to avoid having the little guy be able to celebrate that victory the way that they did, which made it more memorable and impacting the big players in terms of their postseason trajectory. That's just my
I follow the logic.
My conspiracy brain take on it.
All right, this next one is from Dwayne, who says, my real question is why can't Fox just say, well, I'm not going to say all the mean words that Dwayne wrote, but why can't Fox just say, deal with it to Texas and make them play when they decide? They make us carry their network at noon all year.
And they let Penn State flex to night games whenever they want.
Of course, yeah, they're doing their white out. What against Oregon? That's going to be great.
They literally get to do that whenever they want.
That's right.
It feels like they almost always I'm surprised Ohio State Penn State last year wasn't a night game, to be honest.
I am also surprised, actually. Seems odd that they can't even have a say. If that's the case, change it to Saturday night. They can't say no. What will they do? Not show up? Pencil in next year when we go to Texas.
No, they won't show up because they have to go to church, you know?
That's right. ESPN will not care. Yeah, that was my favorite thing. Like, why even bother throwing that in there? Like, that everybody knows. There's no, like, I assume that's slightly tongue in cheek, but like it's one of those things. It's one of those Southern things where it's like it's tongue in cheek, but we're expected to take it seriously instead of just saying "shut up." The reason why they don't just tell
the Lord's name in vain, but feel free to invoke him when it means you get to duck playing a difficult night game.
That's right. The reason why Fox doesn't. To answer your question, Dwayne, the reason why Fox doesn't do it is because they don't want to do it. They want the game to be at noon. That's what the time slot that they want to win. Exactly.
Noon kickoff.
They have sold advertisers on, hey, we're going to win this time slot by 1,000,000,000%. Everybody's going to watch it. We're going to make a butt ton of money together, and that's why they want it. Fox wants it at noon. Okay, like that's the thing that people need to understand. It's not Texas whining and saying, "Oh, let's put it at noon so we don't have to play them at night." It's Fox saying it's going to be at noon, and then Texas going, whoopee, and then Ohio State not being able to have a say in it because that's just how it goes. Somebody actually pointed out that it's Labor Day weekend, so we were talking about how, you know, maybe there's logistics involved with having to like go in class on Monday. Nobody has to go in class on Monday.
We were making jokes, but that was so ridiculous. Like, well, actually, it's Labor Day. So
hey, man,
you guys.
That's part of the bag of putting stuff on the internet.
Shut up,
you got
nerd.
Calendar knowing nerd. How dare you know dates of things?
Doing a bit, for Christ's sake.
No, I'm actually genuinely dumb. You might have been doing a bit, but I'm stupid. But anyway, my point is that this is what Fox wants. And so, yes, it sounds nonsensical and stupid, but they're making money off of that time slot and they're not giving it up. That's what they're doing. So that's the whole thing.
Let me ask you this, because I know that ESPN's already got a Sunday night game.
Yeah, they got baseball. Yeah.
Do you think it would stand if Fox had the opportunity? Well, no, but there's some college football game they've got Sunday because they always have been
Sunday. Yeah.
Right. So, do you think it would stand to benefit Fox to try to go to war with ESPN in terms of proving a point about ratings by putting a competing game in that time slot? Or do you think that it's better for them to just hunker down in the noon time slot, given they've already got it on lock?
That's an interesting question.
Be choosing to do.
I mean, if you want to go to war, that's the best game to use to do it, right? Like at the beginning and at the beginning of the season too, right? It's
interesting that they wouldn't, that they're shying away from that.
That's an interesting point.
With what works, right?
I think they're just, I mean, I think that's probably ultimately what they're just trying to do. And I'm sure they've already,
if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. And I'm sure they've already like made promises to advertisers and set all kinds of things in motion where they're like, okay, we're going to have this artist perform and all the blah, 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 and all this other crap. I'm sure there's a lot of things that they can't really easily, shift.
Who's that guy that we were making fun of how bland his name is that was doing the country? He was the country singer last year.
I don't even remember. Joe Smith. I honestly
it was something very generic.
Yeah,
and we think he was an Ohio guy.
He probably was. I love how we're making fun of generic people as two as two white dudes wearing black shirts on a podcast.
I am a very
Let's.
unique individual.
Hey,
I
guess
don't know
what? We're going to
about you.
talk about video games in a second too. But before we do that, we have a question from our good friend Alvin about movies.
Nate Smith, I think, is what
Nate
that guy's
Smith.
name was.
Yeah, you're not cool and original like me, Johnny Ginter.
I've never
my
met anybody else with
spicy.
the last name Ginter.
Well, I'm a junior, so there's actually two guys exactly like, myself and my dad. All right. Anyway, so this is from our good friend Alvin, who wants to know, what was your favorite movie that you have watched this year in theater or at home? Anything that's popped up?
I don't think I've watched a single movie this year.
Isn't that crazy? I feel like I haven't watched a ton either. Part of that is because I can't go to the movies because I have a 3-year-old, but like, he's starting to get to the age where I feel like he might be able to sit through most of a movie. And, I don't know. We're considering it, but it's difficult to find one that, wouldn't be overwhelming or crazy.
For me, it's the byproduct of just spending so much time with sports between football and the UFC. We're going to lament the death of Inside the NBA on TNT here in a bit. I watched a lot more of the NBA playoffs than I otherwise would because I wanted to savor the last days of that show over the last 2 months. I spend so much time with sports programming that it's like and we've talked about this before too, whether on air or just between us off camera. It just generally feels like the creative media is just not, and this is what everybody who is getting older says about.
Well, sure, yeah. But I know what you're saying.
Definitely feels like creative original content standards have gone downhill within the last 5-10 years, especially with the concentrated effort to just do a remake of like all this original media that came out like 20 or 30 years ago. I'll give you a great example, because I was actually thinking, I didn't actually watch this movie, but I was thinking about doing it just because of seeing all these clips of it on social media within the last week or two. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed seeing Lilo and Stitch when I was a kid.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That is one of my favorite Disney movies, period.
It's a great Disney movie.
That is almost one of the most perfect movies I think that they've ever made. And it did not need a live action remake at all.
No.
Even though I think they already raked in a bunch of money on it.
I was going to say they've made like $400 million.
Which is crazy because the reception to it,
wasn't that great.
Been almost universally negative.
Yeah.
And it completely spits in the face of the original message of the movie.
Yeah.
And its characters to boot.
I mean, that's the thing. Like both of the Lion King live action, quote unquote live action, but they both made. But
my understanding is the Lion
King
live action remake was basically story wise the same movie.
Yeah.
Like in the new Lilo and Stitch, the villain is different, and not only is the villain different, but one of the characters in the old movie that gets a redemption arc by the end of the movie is turned into the villain.
Oh, great.
And not only that, but the original message of the movie would, mahalo means family, and family doesn't get left behind and everything. Spoiler alert, at the end of the movie, apparently Lilo's sister goes to college, and I guess Lilo has to go live with her grandma or something.
Okay.
And so like it's like,
kind of seems like it undermines that message a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. It's like, oh, well, no one gets left behind, but
unless you gotta go
like, we live in reality and we got to leave each other behind sometimes. So, deal with it. I don't know. I'm not going to see the remake, but there's just hardly any new media that I'm motivated to really see.
So I kind of agree with that. I do think, I mean, Netflix had this one thing where I think their CEO or some other guy had been talking about second screen stuff. So the idea is that when you're watching something and you just want something on the background. And so we're
Oh,
just going to produce a lot of,
100%.
yeah. So we're just going to produce a lot of media that people can have on the background where they're playing on their phones or talking to people or whatever. And
Podcasts are a great second screen.
that's right. That's right. That's right. But my point is that I kind of agree with you in the sense that I don't think people will spend the money and take the time to go to movies to see something that isn't like a huge tentpole thing as much as they used to, which is unfortunate because I do think there are some really good smaller movies out there. There's good smaller ideas out there. It's just that it's so much harder to get it in kind of the zeitgeist where people are talking about it because if it does release in theaters, it's for a week and then it's on streaming and it has to compete with literally all the other media ever created in humankind. And so you don't have the same kind of buzz
And
or
even
like,
movies that are a
attention.
hit are on streaming within like a month
I know,
now
it's crazy.
after they come out. Like that
It's
movie, I
crazy.
didn't see that movie Sinners that apparently a lot of people were stoked on, but
Right.
I think it's already on streaming.
It is. I
After
think
it
it is.
was like a big hit in theaters.
And it was supposed to be really good and I didn't get a chance to see it and I probably won't. I'll probably watch it on Halloween or something, and on streaming or something where I don't pay that much attention to it, which sucks because I think it probably deserves my attention. So I do want to watch that movie at some point. A couple that I've watched recently, Alvin, to actually answer your question briefly, is and it's one of those smaller movies that I really wanted to watch, and I was like, I kind of want to watch this in the theaters because I want to, I want to see it in a theater experience, even if it's not a movie I think that quite requires it. But there's this novella that I read a while ago called "Small Things Like These," and it's about the Magdalen laundries in Ireland. And if you don't know about that, essentially what they did is the Catholic Church ran these laundries, like literal laundry services, where they would take in women off the street, prostitutes, homeless, etc., and kind of have them work in these laundries for in exchange for like a small amount of payment and room and board and things like that. And on the surface, that seems like a good bit of charity. In reality, it was incredibly abusive. They would perform like abortions secretly, leave babies out to be exposed to the elements and die. They would beat women. I mean, it was really, really brutal and tough. And these things went on until the late 90s. So this is a relatively new thing. So anyway, this Irish writer, Claire, I think it's Keegan, she writes a lot of really good novellas and short stories. And she wrote this book called Small Things Like These about a guy who kind of encounters the Magdalen laundries and ends up like rescuing one of the women there. And it's about this internal conflict that he faces as someone who was abandoned as a child and all this kind of stuff, or at least he thinks he was abandoned. Anyway, my point with all of this is that it's a really good short story. It's a really intimate, good movie. It stars Cillian Murphy. So, the guy who was Oppenheimer. So it's like a big name. I enjoyed it quite a bit. But again, I was watching like, man, I really should have like I could have gone seen it in the theaters and I didn't because I was like, I'll watch it on streaming. And that kind of sucks. That mentality kind of sucks. Like I wish I would have seen it.
I mean,
theater.
You got a family. I mean, when was the last time
but
you
still, like,
went to a movie by yourself and not with your significant other or
yeah,
kid,
exactly. Never. The other one that I saw recently that I hadn't seen before was Escape from New York, which I was aware of. It's a John Carpenter movie. I freaking love John Carpenter just because his movies are so cheesy and ridiculous. This movie is particularly cheesy and ridiculous. It's not The Thing. It's not quite Big Trouble in Little China. Those are better movies, definitely. But it does start Kurt Russell as Snake Plissken, where a lot of Metal Gear Solid memes, or well, not memes, but just directly ripped from it. That's basically what Metal Gear Solid took directly from. Like he literally is just a character from Metal Gear Solid, or vice versa. And it's a lot of fun. It's a deeply stupid movie, but it is a lot of fun to watch. And there's Mickey Rooney's in it. Adrian Barbeau is in it. And Isaac Hayes, the guy who did the soundtrack for Shaft, is the main bad guy. And he's not an actor, and it's really funny because he tries to act, he tries to do capital A acting, and his little twitch, his little thing that he does to give background personality to his villain is he twitches his eye a lot. And he keeps doing it. And you're like, why is he doing it? In scenes where it doesn't call for it at all, he's just constantly twitching his eye. And
is this
it's
pre
very
or
funny
post
to watch.
Scientology, Isaac Hayes?
I think this is pre. I think this is pre-Scientology Isaac Hayes.
I only know him as Chef from South Park. So
yes. Well, honestly, I feel like he acted better in South Park than he did in this movie. He's pretty bad, but the whole movie is very ridiculous. And yeah, it's Kurt Russell running around a dystopian New York City and punching people in the face. So what more could you want? So that's Ask Us Anything this week. Thank you guys so much for sending those in. We'll keep answering them. A few more things before we get out of here. First of all, hooray! They lowered the win percentage to get in the College Football Hall of Fame from like 60 to 57 or 59.5%. Basically, just so Mike Leach can get in. I think it's dumb to have a win percentage anyway for coaches. Like, it should all be contextual. That's stupid. But I'm glad Mike Leach will get in because he clearly deserves it because he revolutionized the game and he was hilarious. So the other thing that we did want to talk about, of course, is the EA College Football 26 trailer and reveal. First of all, Caleb, or what am I saying? Caleb Downs, although maybe he does deserve to be on it, I guess. But Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams are going to be on the cover. Ryan Williams fell off a little bit, although I understand why they have him on there. But Jeremiah Smith, in my opinion, is big enough name to occupy that full space by himself. But I'm not going to hate on both of those guys.
You got to remember, I mean, the lead.
You got to sell to the whole country. I get it.
The person spearheading this game is a Michigan fan.
Correct. Yes.
So
yeah, they're
you
big
can't.
Media
not only
director
can
guy.
you not have a promotional release for this game without a player that has not actually played a down of Michigan football yet in the form of Bryce Underwood.
Right.
But you also you cannot allow Ohio State to exclusively have the spotlight.
Right.
And so you have to allow a player of the same position as Jeremiah Smith to share the cover with him, even if maybe he isn't technically the second best player in college football coming back this year. That being said, I was a prisoner of the moment when Ryan Williams made that play against Georgia this past season.
Why wouldn't
on the
you be?
show? I thought he was the best receiver in college football over Jeremiah Smith. That was the same weekend that Smith had the pair of one-handed catches against Michigan State. I have to wonder in hindsight if Ryan Williams would be capable of catching a touchdown pass thrown by Devin Brown. That being said, Jeremiah Smith
is anyone
right? Well, we'll find out at Cal this year.
That's right.
Whatever players haven't transferred out of that program since Devin Brown decided to take his talents to Irvine or wherever it is. But in any event, Jeremiah Smith separated himself down the stretch. Everybody thought he should have been the clear-cut cover star. I get that they want to put, you're probably going to sell more copies if you put more players on the cover. That being said, it didn't necessarily work out great for them last year, the three that they chose, especially the Michigan guy. That's right. Yeah, we'll see. And I know Kenyatta Jackson didn't appreciate being made
getting clowned on.
Getting clowned by, again, a player that has not played a down of college football yet.
Correct,
in that trailer. I also thought it was funny. It was like, you couldn't, there's people saying Caleb Downs could be the number one pick in the draft next year as a safety, and you just gave him a pass breakup. You couldn't
PBU.
You couldn't even let him get an interception or force a turnover or whatever. Right. Like, no, Bryce Underwood is too precious to have his image sullied.
Those millions of dollars, man, they justify themselves.
Yeah, now, he's throwing arm punt picks in Michigan's spring game, but he would never throw an interception to Caleb Downs of all people.
Right. The other thing I wanted to mention about that real quick, I like that Ryan Day looks like a Gumby character in it. I think that's pretty fun.
He looks like Dan Le Batard. It's a joke.
It's pretty bad. And I saw some people online, they're like, "Oh my God, let's go." I'm like, it's terrible likenesses of coaches. I don't understand how that changes a whole lot. The actual trailer had almost no actual gameplay. It's going to be the same game as last year. If you liked last year's game, fine. but then that's what you're going to get. And people are like, man, I really hope they boost up like career mode and road to glory. I'm like, they're not.
What company do you think you're dealing with?
Like what? Like,
This is a $70 roster update, you fool.
It's truly wild. Yeah, it's truly wild that people say that every single year about every single EA game release, and it just never happens, and it never dampens anyone's spirits. And I just, hey man, in for a penny, in for a pound. I guess you're just going to buy it every year.
Here's the $1 million question. And Bill Belichick never allowed his likeness to be represented in Madden.
Right.
Will he be in college football 26?
Well, someone pointed out that he will be, but only as a contingency of Jordan, his girlfriend, also being in it, which I think would be very funny. Somebody also mentioned, see, there's so many things. Whenever,
it'd be great if whenever you play as North Carolina, there's like a Ask Jordan feature.
Yeah,
for like
that's what I'm saying though. People, whenever this conversation comes up about what they could do for the next EA Sports game, whatever it's hockey, football, I don't care. There's a billion ideas that people have that are both hilarious and fun, and also could be easily implemented into the game. And of course, they do none of it.
I would require EA to actually do work.
Exactly. Like somebody was saying, like every game that is on the Michigan team's schedule, you have a guy who looks like Connor Stallions in the crowd, right? Like with like a little with the glasses that record. That would be extremely funny and good. But they're not going to do anything like that. I'll never forget.
I think it was like Madden 22 or something. Somebody went into practice mode right after it came out, and they like went into the instant replay feature, and they noticed that like on the stands of like the practice field, they still had like Madden 19 assets and graphics on the banners for like the stands. It was like, they really cared.
Control-C, Control-V.
Not even from last year's game, a game that was 2 or 3 years ago. They're reusing the assets, and they couldn't even bother to update the graphic package that literally says Madden 19, the game from 3 years ago, on the game 3 years in advance. Like what? Like these people are just that's why we were inherently skeptical of how, and granted, a lot of people were jazzed on it. I personally feel like the game was, I don't know how much they patched out of what originally came out, but I thought that play that came out of the guy that was just repeatedly hitting the B button on Judkins and scoring 80-yard touchdowns.
They did patch that out. They did.
Well, they patched that out, but I think that kind of reflected a lot of like how arcadey the game felt generally. And you see people doing all these lateral plays and whatever. I think people are just happy to see, schools represented in a virtual capacity again. And to your point you made earlier about people like, oh my God, the coaches are in the game now. It's like that crowd is always going to exist, and that's why they're remaking and selling these games. So there's people that are just going to be happy with whatever slop EA serves up.
Yeah. Couple other things I want to mention before we get out of here. Good luck to Kayla Harrison here soon, competing in the what's the bantamweight? I think you said
it's the women's bantamweight title fight at UFC 316.
Fellow Middletonian,
the queen of Middletown.
That's
is getting her coronation this weekend at long last, and she
I'm excited for that.
A -700 favorite to beat the current champ Juliana Pena. I got to tell you, somebody that has their finger on the pulse of this stuff, to the point that thanks to the experience and owning of my craft doing sports content that Johnny has helped me out with the last 2 years.
Sure.
I was able to do a guest appearance on one of the UFC's shows a couple weeks ago, The Gambler's Perspective. Talking about the UFC event that was not this past week, but 2 weeks prior to that, because they had a week off before the last week. So Johnny, I'm very grateful to you for that. And I'll be doing a podcast about this upcoming pay-per-view on my platform, MMA Racks. So please tune in for that if you would, Dubcast listeners. I would greatly appreciate it. And I will be talking up how Kayla Harrison is going to become UFC champion, and Middletown will rejoice. The state of Ohio will have its first UFC champion since, I believe,
and Middletown will have something to celebrate for the first time ever.
Other than Johnny Ginter's rise to prominence.
That's right. Anyway, a couple. Okay, so there was one last thing we'll talk about. I do want to mention. Okay, Michigan, of course, has this hearing coming up, and we'll be talking about that. I think it's gonna be a bit of a fart in a hurricane. I don't really think that it'll be as impactful as people think, but if it does, we'll talk about it. And then finally, inside the NBA, it's no more. RAP. I mean, it is kind of still going to be around in the East,
No,
but
it's
it's not going
not.
to be the same. It's not going to be the same.
That bothered me so much that people this week were like, "Well, it's going to be the pregame show for ESPN. It's
That's
not
not
really
even
ending." It's
close
like,
to the same.
do you really think that Disney is going to give the same amount of leash?
Also, it's the pregame show. Pregame's different than post. I don't know. It's not going to be the
No,
same.
yeah, you're 100% right. But the other side of it is, there's no way that Disney is going to give as much create.
It's not going to be as fun.
No, they're not going to be as lax about the standards of expression, so to speak, that Turner was relative to Shaq and Charles and Kenny.
I
There's
think
no
more
way.
annoyingly, they're gonna force them to like prop up all of their other personalities, and it's just gonna bleed in
100%.
And it's gonna bleed in, and it's just gonna end up becoming the same kind of like basic mush that you see.
No, they're
going to
shoehorn. Stephen A. Smith is going to be on that desk.
Of course,
they're going to shoehorn Shannon Sharp into there too, and pulling as much Lakers propaganda as
Kendrick Perkins going to show up. Yeah, it's just gonna be butt. So yeah, that's unfortunate. It's sad.
What's your favorite inside the NBA moment in the show's history?
There's a lot. I mean, honestly, anytime Shaq got needled by Charles about like literally like just Shaq losing his mind at Charles Barkley about really innocuous stuff. Like there's a whole compilation on YouTube of Shaq just getting increasingly angry at Charles Barkley. And that is like, I know it's not like a singular moment, and they've had some really fun singular moment stuff, like Shaq talking about like, San Antonio and everything. But like in general, Shaq getting mad at Charles Barkley and then always clapping back with like, oh, well, you don't have any rings. And then Charles not caring and doubling down is still like, that was by far their funniest bit, because you could tell that Charles clearly doesn't care and Shaq really, really, really cares. So like anytime that happened was just instant gold for me. I absolutely love that.
I have a politically correct and a politically incorrect answer.
Well, let's stick with the politically correct one, I guess.
Okay. Well, you could probably infer what the politically incorrect one was.
Sure.
But I guess the more politically correct one, I mean, when this happened, it just spoke to how good for how long the show has been.
Mm-hmm.
Because honestly, I thought it was one of the funniest things that has happened, and it happened last season, just out of nowhere. Barkley going off on Galveston, Texas, is just like, who else could pull that bit out of their brain? And it was just so great with Shaq egging him on, and then it's just out of nowhere. It's like you take. I mean, I don't know who came up with the original premise of, playoff teams going to going to Cancun after they fall out of the postseason. I would assume that they probably did that several years ago, but to then warp that into, what is a location that we could just immediately take a dump on and everybody resonate with, and for him to just pull out Galveston out of nowhere like that was. It's one of the 5 funniest bits I think they've ever done, and it's certainly not. I don't think even the best one, but the fact that it happened in like year 30 or whatever of the show.
Right. No, it was still unbelievably entertaining.
They're still pumping out bangers in their 3rd decade of doing this. Like, it speaks to how incredible that and entertaining their dynamic was and is. I think you would be naive to think that it's not going to be very different and more toned down at a network like Disney compared to what it's been the last 30 years. So I'm going to miss them. I have so many fond memories of watching that show. I mean, so I saw somebody make this point, and I know that because you're a Cincy guy, Unfortunately, you don't have as of much of a basketball team to, I think, gravitate towards. But
True.
I saw somebody make the point earlier this week as the show was preparing to go off that there are very few things as uh, emotionally satisfying as a basketball fan or as a fan of an NBA team as when your team plays on TNT and then they win or they blow out the other team in significant fashion, and then you get to bask in the joy of the post-game show of that trio of
Right.
Shaq, Charles, and Kenny talking up your team
Right.
for an hour after that kind of win happens. It's very much the sweetest of cherries on top of the cake of the experience of that. I can't say I've gotten to share in that experience as a Bulls fan for a very long time, but they did win something like 20 games on TNT Thursday nights in a
Oh,
row
there
at
you go.
one point within the last decade. So salutations. I will miss that show much more than Around the Horn, but you know,
No,
eventually
they're
we'll
equally as
stop.
important.
Eventually, we will stop lamenting the ends of various TV shows to close out the Dubcast at some point this off season, perhaps
Yeah.
as soon as next week. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, who knows? All right. Well, until then, though, we'll keep an eye, I guess, on any cancellations that happen, and then of course, if Michigan gets the death penalty, they're not going to get the death penalty. But if Michigan gets the death penalty, we'll definitely be here to talk about it. But until then, I'm Johnny,
I'm George.
and we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.